Private equity is something I would tell people to be very careful about. Because actually I did have some experience with it.
Hello and welcome to Beauty and the Biz, where we talk about the business and marketing side of plastic surgery. I'm your host, Catherine Maley, author of Your Aesthetic Practice, What Your Patients Are Saying, as well as consultant to plastic surgeons to get them more patients and more profits. Now, today's special guest is Dr. Stephen Prendiville. He's a facial plastic surgeon practicing for over 24 years in private practice in Southwest Florida. Now, Dr. Prendiville is recognized nationally as a facelift expert with more than 20 articles published in medical journals, and he has served as guest editor for Facial Plastic Surgery Clinics of North America. He also is a featured presenter at many state and national meetings about facial plastic surgery, and that's where I've known him from. So Dr. Prendiville is one of 500 doctors in the world to receive the prestigious Real Self 500 Award. And that's the leading online community that helps consumers make confident choices in elective cosmetic procedures. Dr. Prendiville is also the past president and secretary-treasurer of the Florida Society of Facial Plastic Surgery. He was awarded a fellowship in facial plastic and reconstructive surgery at St. Louis University in Missouri, where he was a clinical instructor in the St. Louis University Department of Otolaryngology. All surgeries are performed in-house at Dr. Prendiville's state-of-the-art Quad A accredited surgical center. Dr. Prendiville, welcome to Beauty and the Biz podcast.
Thanks for having me, Catherine. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, it's been a while, but let's just talk about how you went from fellowship, because it looks like it was an academia fellowship, and then how did that get you into private practice? And was that a straight road or a zigzag like everyone else?
Well, that's a great question. So when I was in St. Louis, they asked if I wanted to stay on faculty at St. Louis University, but I really didn't want to stay in academia, because I'd been essentially, it was 6 years of residency and a year of fellowship. And I felt that at that point, I wanted to go out into private practice. And I grew up in Florida, at least for the most part, and I wanted to get back to some warmer weather. So I was going to choose either California or Florida. And it was around the time of the dot-com boom and then bust. And Florida was just a better opportunity to come to. And, a lot of my fellowship was actually in facial reconstruction. In other words, reconstructing Mohs defects from skin cancer and things like that. And so I felt it'd be like a comfortable mix of coming in and doing a lot of reconstruction, which is obviously Medicare and insurance based. And then getting, obviously, I like the facial aesthetic, the facial plastic surgery. And I felt that, that would be a significant portion of my practice also. But I just felt it was time to finish my career in academics at that time.
And then did you go straight into private practice? Did you join someone else's practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I joined another facial plastic surgeon, and I was his associate for 2 years. And I just felt that it was going to be better for me as far as the direction of the practice, because at that point, I kind of made a decision that our philosophies were a little bit different. And it would be better for me to have my own practice. The way I wanted to market myself, project myself, was a little bit different. And so I started my own practice in 2003. And then in 2005, I bought a building and I developed my own office and then my operating room. And then eventually 2 spas. And that's another story, which I have some advice on. So,
yeah. Wait, let's talk about it right now then.
Yeah. So the advice I'd give to people that in facial plastic surgery is really focus on the core aspects of what you do very well. And that's going to be surgery. Okay. A couple of things have evolved, and I'll talk about the surgical side and also talk about the spa side. But the spa side the med spa side involves a lot of moving parts, a lot of people, a lot of personalities. You're selling products and services with much lower margins from a business standpoint. So a lot of effort goes in to it to sort of generate not as much income. And in some ways, it can help to spread your name in terms of word of mouth. But I think these days, there are much more effective ways to do that. For example, we talked about this earlier, using social media such as Instagram and Facebook. I think primarily Instagram, to spread your name is a much better way to do it. And I think once people are seeing you as the guy that does facelifts and that's the way they look at you, or the guy who does rhinoplasty, or however you want to brand yourself, the better you're going to do. The med spa business is a little bit more, I would call it like the fluffy side of things. You have to have a very good manager. You have to run inventory control. And again, the profit margins are not as good. So I eventually decided to get out of the spa business. And I now have somebody I'm affiliated with that's in our building, but I don't run the spa anymore.
So you had two spas?
I did. I had one in Fort Myers, adjacent to my office and operating room. And I also had one in Naples, because in Southwest Florida, there's probably about 1.2 million between Fort Myers or Lee County and Collier County. Collier County tends to be a lot more seasonal. So, but obviously there's a very high per capita income in Naples. But it's also tends to be more of a sort of transitory snowbird population there. So you have to have a presence there, but you really also have to have a presence in Fort Myers. So my main base has always been in Fort Myers. Naples has been the secondary market, but it's a place where I've drawn a lot of patients from. A lot of surgeries have come from Naples. So,
Huh. So the spa thing wasn't for you. Now how are you involved? You
yes, well,
affiliate?
so I don't actually own the spa anymore. I have an esthetician I'm affiliated with, actually rents the space and runs the spa. And we refer patients for postoperative makeup, for skincare, and things like that. But we don't actually I don't actually own the spa anymore. So
But
I can.
it's in your center, your building?
It's in my building.
That is an interesting idea. I haven't heard that much.
Yeah, I think it works better. I mean, honestly, really, it just goes along with my philosophy. It's just to focus on what you do really well. And I think if you spread yourself out say too much, or say that you're too many things, you're kind of going in the wrong direction. And so when I came into practice in 2001, there was a real big push toward the minimally invasive side of things, or simplifying things like isolating neck lifts, doing mini lifts, and newer energy devices were coming online to sort of, quote, be early facelifts and things like that. And in my opinion, all of those things have been a big bust. I mean, things like, and I'm not trying to put down any specific company or a device, but things like all therapy, like Thermage, like Morpheus, et cetera, they leave a lot of patients wanting for a better result. And these procedures often kind of compromise the sort of the difficulty level of a future facelift. And what they also do is they're sort of awake procedures for most patients. They tend to be somewhat painful when they're being done. They tend to be expensive, and the results don't even approximate what is being done by surgery. So my distillation of experience is that instead of keeping patients happy until they have a facelift, they can alienate you from your potential future facelift patients. And they're making divert your attention into different directions when you should be very focused. And that's what I advise anybody who wants to do a lot of facelift surgery: come out and start doing facelift surgery, and don't mess around with that other. I mean, you have to, I suppose, dabble in some of that. You certainly need to be well versed in fillers and toxins and things like that. But the other things that are kind of taking away from your surgical practice, I'd stay away from.
I hear you, and you have to know who you are and what you're interested in doing. If you're trying to build an empire, you do need to have all the other services, because you're
Yeah.
trying to catch the patient wherever they are. But on the other hand, if you're not into that, stick to the surgery.
Yeah, I think it's changed a little bit. I mean, the whole idea of providing, something of everything for everybody. A lot of people, we mentioned Instagram. I mean, there are people from all around the country who just, they're looking for somebody. I mean, if you look, for example, if you look at some of the guys that are like really successful, like, Mike Nyack in St. Louis, or Dr. Kassir up in New York, or Amir Karam in San Diego, they just have this great online presence. They have a great way of explaining their story of what they do. And this is what they're focusing on. That's what patients really want. They want somebody that's really focused on facelift surgery, that's a true expert in it. I don't know the logic of offering everything to everybody anymore. I used to believe that. I don't believe it anymore. So
Well, after working with all of you guys, the logic is you realize, wait a second, I'm the whole business here. I
yeah.
can't go to the bathroom. I can't go on vacation. I can't do anything else. I'm really stuck. And they don't like that feeling. So then they think, oh, let's get some other people on board and let them make some money. But it will never be the money that's made out of surgery. So there's just such a pull.
There is. I mean, I understand the reasons for doing it, but I kind of came to a realization a number of years ago. Because I've had a number of lasers, and there's two devices I'd recommend any facial plastic surgeon get. I'd recommend getting a good IPL machine, and I'd recommend getting a good fractionated CO2 laser. The rest of the machines, I mean, and anybody will tell you this, they're very expensive, and the cost of the disposables is high. The cost of insuring them against breakdown is high, and they're relatively lower income producing devices than you would like to have. And you would think that, oh, just because I have a hair removal device, or I have this fat melting device, et cetera, that you're going to make all this money. It's not really like that. I think anybody who's honest with you will tell you that. So and I've done all that. I'm just telling you honestly, like for me, I'm happiest focusing on the core of what I do. I think my patients are happier seeing that I do that, especially patients that are looking for somebody who's a facelift expert. So.
Hello there. Quick pause to ask you if you have gaps in your practice draining your time, profits, and peace of mind. If so, I can help you streamline, grow, and take the guesswork out of your practice. Book your practice growth strategy review at catherinemaley.com, and let's turn those gaps into growth. Now, back to the podcast. I will tell you though, there are practices who have turned those med spas into $1 million business, but it takes a killer manager or that you trust. Like you mentioned, inventory control. There's nothing easy about that, but there is money to be made there. That's why,
Sure.
and when it's the exit, that's what the private equity people want, that reliable income. So there's no one answer. There's just a good answer for you. But didn't you be an associate on not too long ago?
Yeah. So that's another, private equity is something I would tell people to be very careful about. Because actually I did have some experience with it, and
Share.
okay, so I had personal reasons for getting involved. It was actually right before the pandemic. I got divorced, and I needed a sort of financial settlement, et cetera, and it was a good way to address it. And let's say the private equity concern was one that was at least associated with a group in town that I knew and that I trusted. But I would tell anybody that's thinking about that, that's thinking of practicing more than 3 to 5 years, that their contract has to be a lot more specific than they realize, because what your interests are not necessarily the interests of the private equity folks. And so you have to be very specific about the type of marketing that you want. Okay, and literally to the dollar amount, or to the percentage of your gross. You have to be specific about that. You have to be specific about your employees, because you want to have a successful team. Any successful plastic surgeon or facial plastic surgeon out there is only successful because they have a great team around them. And if you don't have that, it's going to be very difficult for you. You also have to be careful, because there's a lot of middle management associated with private equity that don't do very much, and they make, let's say, strange decisions. So I decided it was a decision that I wanted to get out of, and I'm very happy that I did.
That's really interesting, because what was I'm sure you had an earnout, right? Like you had to stay for so many years.
Well, every contract is different. So, basically, I had to effectively buy myself out, but it was well worth it to do it. Without getting into specific details of what was wrong, et cetera, I would tell anybody looking at a situation that if you're going to retire in 2 years, and you're not really that concerned about the growth or continuing growth of your practice, it's probably fine. But I don't know that I would recommend it to anybody, in the future. And I guess every group is different. So it's, you just things came up that I did not imagine. I had trouble having specifically with marketing, and marketing is the lifeblood of plastic surgery. If you don't market, you're simply not going to have you're not going to have patience. And that was not something that was not a situation that you know they agreed with. So
They weren't going to do any marketing for you. Is that the point?
um, there was a period of about 8 months where there was no marketing at all. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So I mean, every situation is very specific, but I would say that you know you would think it would be there because I was actually within the entity. I was the highest EBITDA producing entity within the whole situation. But I really can't describe all the details, but I was very very happy to get out.
Ask
So
you this though, when you sign up with a PE group, do you have to sign a non-compete?
you do, yeah.
And then do
Um,
you get to take your patient list back, or do you have to start from scratch?
again, this is all specific to how you negotiate things going in and going out. And so, I was able to essentially get out intact as my practice. Again, and there was a buyout amount, which I can't really disclose, but it was. It ended up being better for me and longer. And if anybody has any specific questions, they should, give me a call. I'll tell them, again. But look at that contract. Make sure you're marketing. Make sure your staff and make sure that are both intact. And make sure the middle management involvement is limited.
They still let you keep your space, your list. They were just behind the scenes,
Yeah,
right? So okay,
exactly.
that's good.
Yeah,
I was thinking you had to like pull out completely, like everything and start over. But that's not bad. However, did your staff stay intact? Because staff
yeah.
often get
Mhm.
lost in this
Yeah,
trend.
I kept my staff intact, and there are ways that you can do that. I always kept them happy, and I mean, like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you really are kind of in control of those variables, and the other entity is doing the right thing, and also, really, the thing is that what happens with private equity is they'll have a change in leadership, and when the change in leadership changes, everything changes. And so that's really kind of what happened. And the problems with the group were sort of not related to me, they're related to other things. And so they went to cost cutting measures as a way of addressing things. And as I said, if you cut marketing in facial plastic surgery, you know, in this business, you are who you say you are. Now you should be good. If you're saying that you are somebody, you should be that person, obviously. But if you're not out there saying it in marketing, you're going to see practice contraction. And so, I intended to work for a while, so I didn't want to have that happen.
How long did you last in that environment?
It started in July of 2020 and ended October of 23. So just over 3 years. Or sorry. Yeah, just over 3 years. Yeah.
And so now, what does your practice look like? You still have your OR?
I still have my OR. I still have my office space.
Mhm.
I, my staff is all intact.
Good.
We have a much more aggressive and modern marketing campaign. The thing is, I will tell you one thing though. It really, I would say, brought me into the modern world in terms of social media and marketing, things like that, because I knew that there are things that I had to do beyond just relying on word of mouth. Because I mean, I have great word of mouth down here, but that'll get you a couple of facelifts a month. If you want to do over 100 facelifts a year, you have to have really robust, and appropriately aggressive marketing in place. And you got to be able to show your results. You have to be able to show. We mentioned Instagram before. The patients love the theater of plastic surgery. They love to see, what your office looks like, what your staff are doing, what your post-ops look like, what your post-op patients have to say, and some other funny stuff that's mixed in. But I try to do a lot of patient teaching in it also, just to explain this is what we expect from you. This is what we want you to do. And also in terms of expectations, what's going to work, what's not. What I just said about energy devices, I've said that a million times on Instagram. I'm a big non-believer in energy devices. So, and the thing is, when I do a facelift, well, just like every other facelift, a patient's had alt therapy or Morpheus or something, it's a tougher facelift. It's more like a revision. So,
Mhm. It's as a consumer, though, I've had all of those done because as a consumer, it's
Yeah,
so
I know.
tempting. It's so compelling to say, "You don't need surgery yet. You can live off this for another year." And it's like,
I
"Okay."
know, I know. Yeah, and you bring up another. That's an interesting thing. For patients. I mean, patients ask me, well, when is the right time for facelift? And I did an Instagram video on this, and I say, well, you have to have indications. The indications have to bother you,
Yeah.
and you have to want to do something about it. You have to feel convinced that that's the right thing to do. And a lot of times patients will have, one and two, in other words, indications and it bothers them, but they're just not, convinced yet that they want to do something and they want to try something else. That's where the whole energy device, well, let me try this first. Well, guess what? That doesn't work. So I just say to patients now, I say, look, if you're not ready for a facelift, okay, you have any indications and they bother you, go take a nice cruise and come back to me when you're ready for a facelift. That's because you'll be happier with the money you spent.
Right? I agree. If I could have that money back because I've had, 2 Althera,
Yeah.
2 Thermage, and, I don't know, 6 Morpheus.
Uh-huh.
I that was a facelift right there. That's
Exactly, and that's part of the issue, and part of the thing with those devices is, the surgeon has to pay for the lease on it or whatever the insurance is, pay for their staff, pay for the disposable. At the end of the day, the patient's not that happy, the surgeon's not that happy. So, I just went to the simplification of things and said, you know what, we really just don't need that. I don't need to have patients who are not happy in my practice.
yeah.
And those kinds of circumstances do not have if you look at the satisfaction curves compared to what we do surgically, they're very low, So,
Mm. Are you completely focused on facelifts, or are you also doing rhino and blephs?
yeah, well, of course, I would say facial rejuvenation is the majority of what we do, which is, facelifts, brow lifts, eyelid surgery, laser resurfacing. I also do a lot of rhinoplasty, but the bulk of what I do is facial rejuvenation, and can be neck lifts, mini lifts. It depends on the circumstance. We have a slightly older population down here, so deep plane facelift is kind of my niche now. That's what I talk a lot about. So.
Isn't that what we talk about at the meetings?
Yeah, and, the funny thing is that deep plane facelift has been around since the '90s. It's just that it has been. I think it's really the way I describe it to patients is when I do a deep plane facelift, I know that I've done everything that I can to mobilize the soft tissue, to reposition the soft tissue, tighten it as much as I can. I've done everything that I can. There's nothing else you can do, and then it's really up to the patient's biology and ability to heal. As far as how things are going to be. And in the neck, we do a very aggressive neck lift. I do, what's termed a deep neck lift, where we remove submental fat and we trim down the digastric muscles, and we do a platysmoplasty. So, I'm very confident in the results that we get. There's really nothing else you can do when you're doing it. So.
Why is it so debated at the meetings?
I think that, well, first of all, I think that there are different ways to get great results. So I think some people, would do like an extended SMAS and get great results and they're happy with it. And that's fine. I was not as happy with the extended SMAS results. And also from a technical standpoint, an extended SMAS means that you're doing a true bilaminar approach, which means you're lifting the skin and then you're lifting the SMAS. And if somebody's had a previous facelift or let's say they have, quote, Ozempic face where they have the soft tissue variability, lack of tensile strength, it's going to be tougher to do an extended SMAS lift and get the same kind of result. So I personally find I get the best results with it. That's not to say, that some people can't get great results with an extended SMAS. And of course, the old joke, if you ask a facelift surgeon to name the top 3 surgeons in the world, he's going to forget the other 2. So, I mean, that's just the way it goes, yeah. But I don't think anybody would argue that a deep plane facelift is a bad procedure. There is a slightly higher risk of facial nerve branch injury, but I mean, the reality is the branches of the facial nerve are really deep to where you're working. So I'm not, I joke with my patients, I say, well, if I was in Costa Rica, I wouldn't even tell you about it because I'm not worried about it. But in the United States, we have to let you know as a form of informed consent. And I say that to everybody. I say, it's like the Florida power line engineer comes out to your house. I know where the power line is and they stay away from it. And that's, what we do. And most people who are experienced doing it, even for revision cases, you really shouldn't have any issues. So but that's where some of the controversy comes from.
All right. So give me, like, what would you say is the biggest challenge of running a solo practice?
The biggest challenge is making sure that your staff stay focused, and their number one job is patient care. Make sure that the patient's concerns are addressed before the surgery, and from the first phone call to basically booking surgery, and then of course post-operatively. Nobody wants to feel like their questions or their concerns were unanswered, and even for minor things, if patients feel like they're not listened to, they will be very unhappy. Um, so keeping them focused, making sure, because, in good months, what tends to happen is people make the assumption that it's always going to be really, really busy. Well, you're going to have peaks and valleys. And so it's a continuously keeping the schedule full, and also identifying areas in the year where things tend to be less busy. And if somebody, let's say, wants a little bit of a price break or something, you just keep them in mind for that circumstance.
Do you have a snowbird issue down there?
Oh yeah, I mean we definitely do. I mean there's definitely a migratory population, but it has changed, especially since COVID. We have a large, and people just moved here in droves.
Since half the state of California moved to Florida, I would think you have a nice influx of facelifts. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's going to be coming. Yeah. So, but we have a couple of years ago, before a couple of years ago, and we never saw people from California. Now, it's not unusual to see people, after COVID and based on the other circumstances coming out. Yeah.
Mm.
So, but one of the thing I want to mention about maintaining practice is maintaining staff unity, so that everybody is together, as opposed to having people who
How
are.
do you do that? How do you keep the culture intact?
Yeah, you have to have a strong leader that you can communicate with, that's able to keep everybody together. Because I mean, being in practice 24 years, I've seen all kinds of staff come through. And for the last 10 years, I've had one staff member now for 21 years, and then it's like 10 years, 8 years, and a year and a half for my core staff. And it's just making sure they're basically all happy, and they're all their concerns are listened to, and nobody is given sort of special treatment. Everybody's treated fairly, basically.
Good job there, boy. That is nothing easy. Staff is the number one challenge of every
Sure.
practice I've ever interviewed, and it's just because it's human people,
Yeah.
human bodies being different and thinking differently and having different beliefs and values. It's nothing easy about that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
Regarding, I was going to say, like, give me a big mistake that was made, but you learned a lot from. Would you say that's the PR thing or something else?
Um, a big mistake that was made. Well, we had something happen, recently, and the funny thing people should understand is that it doesn't matter how many years you are in practice, you always have to be vigilant. You can never, ever, ever like not do things correctly. So I tell my staff, if a patient calls and they have a wound issue, we want a picture, okay, so we can look at it and let them know whether it is a serious issue or not. And this happened like just before Christmas. We had a patient called, and she actually said that she'd had a wound dehiscence, and there was no picture taken or et cetera. And when I saw her the day after Christmas, I was not very happy, so that's the type of thing, is communication and maintaining vigilance. And, I haven't had an issue like that happen in years, but those things can happen, so.
How did that happen and how did you fix it? Because that's one of those little things that
Yeah.
is a big deal, you
Yeah.
know?
So there's certain times when you got to tell the staff, look, if somebody calls with a wound issue, we need a picture of it, and we need to evaluate it. And and just having reviewed malpractice cases and things like that, you have to look at the small details, and because everything comes down to the patient's perception of what was done, and if they perceive that something wasn't looked at, or you didn't pay attention to their concerns, the way they perceive the problem is far different. So essentially, I just told my staff going forward, this should always be the case. But if somebody says they're having a wound problem, I want a picture. And, you know, and that's the way it had been. But, things can slip through the cracks. Um, another thing is pre-op instructions. We have that, that down. So we haven't had any really bad offenders in a number of years. But I did have a patient a number of years ago, the day after facelift, go paddleboarding. Just go paddleboarding. Yeah. So of course that patient got a hematoma, and we had to go back to the OR. I mean, so now my joke is, well, and I don't want you paddleboarding, and people look at you like you're crazy, but things like that happen. So we also tell patients, look, we expect you to behave yourself. The vast majority of patients do it, but from time to time, you have people who don't. And the biggest mistake that patients kind of get into in the post-op phase is they get into a belief that their immediate post-op phase is their final result. And we say you have to stay positive and you have to listen to us, because what you have right now is it's like I say, if you're going to Hawaii or you're going to Bali, you don't judge your vacation on your 16 or 20-hour plane flight. You do it when you get there. That's your vacation. Yeah. And so that's what people have to understand. It's also conveying that to patients. So they'll yes you, but so that they understand it.
Right. Yeah, and they don't read anything until they're in the middle of it going, what happened? What did he say
Yeah.
about this? And then they
Yeah.
start pulling out all the pre-op and the
Another
post-op.
thing that we're very aggressive on is if we smell or we detect a negative person in the patient's milieu, we jump on it. And we tell a person you can't be like that. Or if let's say there's a husband who he's not going to he's going to create problems, or it's usually a husband or a male partner, because most of my patients are women. We jump on that, say it might be a good idea if we get a nurse, or have a friend help out, things of that nature. It's an additional expense, but it's worth it in terms of the result. So
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So regarding like an exit strategy,
yeah,
what like now what are you going to do? Because you already went down that one road and
yeah.
that was the right road. So now do you just
Yeah, I don't, the thing is, I think some people dream of retirement and I don't.
I don't either.
Because yeah, I had that experience, like many people did during COVID, where we couldn't operate, or we basically couldn't function for several months.
Mhm.
And that was not what I would describe as an ideal time. I mean, I could go boating on Southwest Florida, and I did lots of it. But I found that very unfulfilling. I really, our identities are tied up in what we do. I enjoy doing what I'm the best I've ever been at it. I don't, and plus the income level you can make is much higher, generally speaking, than a retirement. So I don't necessarily think of it in those terms, but I am planning, probably in the next several years, of bringing somebody in who's interested in doing breast and body.
Mhm.
And then a few years after that would be another facial plastic surgeon. So, and the idea is, they would buy equity into the practice, things like that. So more on that route. And you never know. You just have to keep the options open. I'm not saying I wouldn't do the private equity thing again, but I'd be a lot more specific about it. I didn't think I had to be. I thought, the common knowledge was everybody wants to make money, but I was wrong. So.
Well, if you own your building, you could just become the landlord and work there a couple days a week.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, I know. Well, I think one thing that has to be understood about, I think most people agree with this, is that when you have a busy practice, it's a full contact sport, and you can't just step back and say, because your results are much better when you're operating 3-4 days a week. They just are. Sorry, I'd be careful as a patient of just going to somebody who's kind of stepping back. You want somebody that's busy, likes
Yeah.
what they're doing, is fully engaged. That's where you want to be. So.
So let's talk about the patients themselves. Have you noticed any trends from years ago to now? Are the patients any different? Are they asking for different things that they didn't before? Is the
Yeah.
demographic different now?
Well, definitely, in terms of, since I'm a facial rejuvenation guy, we're seeing younger facelift patients. In other words, they're foregoing the pillow face and the other things that other, people have gone through. And they want to go straight to surgery. So I would say I see a lot more patients in their late 40s, early 50s who want facelifts than, let's say, 10 years ago. procedurally, we're seeing a lot of patients asking for lip lifts because that has become a big trend. In other words, a bullhorn or direct lip lift, which we've always kind of done, but they've become much more popular. For probably through social media reasons. Um, and I think people still do fillers and toxins, but they're less seeing that as a way of sort of an alternative to doing a facelift. I think that concept is kind of going away. But I still love fillers. I love Sculptra. It's a great volumizer. I think it's a standalone treatment. I love injecting lips and adding volume to the face where it's appropriate. So.
Do you do a lot of fat transfer?
I don't. I'm actually not a big fat transfer guy. I'm much more a sculptor guy. And say to patients, I like consistency. I like to know what I'm getting, and I know what I'm getting with Sculptra, and we don't always know what we're getting with fat. And not everybody agrees with me, but for starters, I think fat injections are overdone with facelifts. I think a lot of people getting fat don't need it. And I explain that to patients. I mean, it's, a well done, high SMAS deep plane facelift is going to be a self volumizing procedure. So the volume that's here is going to be up here. And you really won't need it. If you do need volume, we'll add Sculptra. And I have specific examples where that was definitely the right thing to do. And the patient had a very reliable, consistent result with it. And actually in those patients, I start the Sculptra at the time of surgery, and then a month later and a month after that. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I remember Dr. McCullough at the meetings, he would always say, he's been around for 60
Yeah.
years.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And he shows incredible facelift photos,
Yeah.
and he says, and there's no Botox and filler involved. Never
Yeah.
done it, never going to do it. And I
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
his results are amazing. And
Well, he's one of the giants of facial plastic surgery. I mean, and he does and has always done a great facelift. And the reality is that, yes, I mean, you should, as a facial plastic surgeon, be able to do a standalone facelift. That there are circumstances where volume is required, but for most of the patients I see, they don't need it. So.
Okay. I'm all about fat transfer because I didn't like the pillow face.
There's a saying, there's the fat lovers and fat haters. I think Val Lambros said that in the meeting, and I wouldn't say I'm a fat hater, but I like consistency. I don't like to add problems. I like to minimize problems. And when you don't have consistency, and some people will tell you, I get great consistency. Well, I don't see it. And I remember back in 2000, I think it was 2002 or something. I was down at a meeting actually in Florida Keys, and there was a colleague of mine. I have a lot of respect for him. He's always done a ton of fat, and he was showing his results, and I just didn't see the magic. I just didn't see it. And in my facelifts, as I told you, I didn't see the need for it. And so I have respect for varying opinions, and I think that people get great results with fat and without it. That's the way it goes. So
For sure. So let's talk about marketing. I know you like marketing. What's working for you?
Yeah. So what's market? I think you have to do some degree of local, and that would be, sort of like still like in this area, the glossy magazine works to some degree as far as just saying you're there. You have to do, SEO, Google ads, things of that nature to when people are looking up, best facelift surgeon in Fort Myers, best facelift surgeon in Naples. So your name pops up. I think you have to participate in forums like Real Self so that, when people are looking up a specific question, you're going to come up. I think now Instagram is a necessity. You have to be describing yourself, again, the theater of plastic surgery, showing who you are, showing how you can talk to patients, showing how you deal with issues. And because people are really considering all of those things, and what your staff is like, what your office is like, a lot of variables that make people feel or don't or not feel comfortable with a surgeon. And of course, you have to show your results. You have to have a certain book of results that's going to convince patients that you're the right guy or gal. So,
Let me ask about that because a big concern of facial plastics is my patients, are very private. And you need those photos and the reviews and pretty much before and after photos and reviews are like the two important. How are
Yeah.
you getting them?
Well, so that's a very good question and a big dilemma because naturally, if patients are asked, they're going to want to maintain their privacy. But that is changing. I would say that is a trend that's changing. People are happy to share their experience. The way we frame it with our patients is more a patient education opportunity. You came in, you were concerned about this, you were worried about anesthesia, looking weird, having a lot of pain. You have an opportunity to educate people about the positive experience that you had. Now, not everybody wants to do that, and so, but it's really your staff has to be on their toes when they recognize a patient is happy to seek a review, when there's an exceptional result, to get photos and ask for permission to use the photos. It's tough. It's always an uphill battle, and frankly, you just have to be in practice for a certain period of time before you have those numbers. It's tough.
It is
I'm
an
good.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So for Instagram, because it's also really important on Instagram to have those photos,
yeah.
how much time are you spending on Instagram and do you have help?
So I'm actually talking to somebody who may take it over as we speak. I really just get on there in the morning and I try to do one video like about 4 days a week. Yeah. And it's just really about some topic that's on my mind or a patient brings up or a question I've been asked, in the near or distant past, because, there's no bad questions, and then of course there are the same concerns. There's the triad of concerns the patients have about facelift surgery. It's painful. I'm going to look weird and anesthesia is dangerous. So, I mean, we could talk about that endlessly because when a patient comes to see me, those are the three things I'm always, talking about.
So do you drive around in your car in your Rolls Royce? Because some of the, like some of the PR people say you need the branding. So you're saying
Yeah.
drive around in
Um,
your Rolls Royce and answer your questions.
yeah, it's funny. I actually drive it. I drive a truck. I enjoy that.
Oh, okay. That's a different brand.
But sometimes I mean, I've had very nice sports cars in the past, and some people do value. They look at in the parking lot, see what you're driving.
Yeah.
But you have to do what you like, and I prefer driving a truck. I've been doing this long enough that I think I have the right to do that. So.
Right. You've already proven yourself. Yeah. You don't need the car by the beach, although it has some merit there. If you're
Well,
trying
my
to
wife told me she wants a Lamborghini, so I think
oh
that's
dear
probably
God.
on the list at some point. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, you better ramp up your marketing. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so tell me a crazy patient or staff story that you care to share.
Well, I told you that one crazy situation where a patient went paddleboarding. I'm trying to think, and there's so many. Um, I remember we had a male patient who went home and he took off his dressing and pulled out his drains both in the same night, and then he was upset at us for asking him, what happened. So we had those experiences too. Staff wise, I've had staff members quit like right before a surgery, and that was difficult to manage. But you just find a way. But I was, when I hired my last group, I would say I've had one long-term staff member at 21 years, one about 10 years, one about 8 years. When I brought the middle two in, I was very specific with them about what I wanted as far as, I want you to see yourself in the practice. You'll be rewarded. I want you to work hard, take care of patients. This is what I don't want. I don't want you to sort of, be uh, in a sort of war with any of the other staff members. I want you to get along. And I got the right personalities, and I would say I was a little tough on them in the beginning because I'd had some harder experience before that, and they still tell me things I don't remember, which is kind of funny. But I was tougher on them. But they're the most loyal, most amazing staff, and I'm very thankful that I have them. So
Is there anything you're doing? Are you giving them perks, fun events, money?
Yeah, so I do. I do bonus them. I tell them it's kind of it's going to be discretionary based on the month and based on what I'm able to do. So but I do, and I've done that for the last 5 years. And basically that helps them, and it also obviously people are naturally self-interested, so you're going to want to keep your staff happy, and of course their salaries have to be competitive in the industry. So you know uh, those are things to consider. I've never had a problem giving my staff bonuses. When we do well, for sure.
It's a lot cheaper to give them a bonus than go find a new one and start all
Oh
over,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely, absolutely. The kind of depth of experience that we have now, it'd be very hard to replace.
Right? And the
Yeah,
continuity and the camaraderie,
sure.
that's actually priceless. So
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, actually, we just did it. We did a facelift for my long-term RN, on Instagram, and it's funny that patients come on and say, "Oh, how's Cindy doing?" et cetera. It's really nice, and actually, in a lot of the reviews we get, my staff gets mentioned as far as the great care that they received. So that's
That's
wonderful.
when you know you're doing a good job, when the patients say, "The doctor was terrific, but I really love the staff. They took great care of me," and they name them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think also for a younger surgeon to know, it's like know what you're good at. You're good at surgery. Have your staff become really good at doing the instructions and post-op care. I mean, you have to see the patients, but the whole thing is you don't want to burn your mojo too quickly. And when I was younger, in the first couple of years, I wanted to do everything. I tried to be involved in everything, and that I learned pretty quickly that's not the right way to do it. So
Well, at least you learned early on, because some surgeons are still hanging on for dear life to every part of this, and the control of
yeah,
that is
yeah.
exhausting, I would think. But
I don't think that's healthy. I think that, if you want to work a long time, you have to maintain a balance. Like, for example, last 5 years, I'm in the best shape I've been in my since my late 20s. You have to
congratulations.
eat well. As if you look at any of the sort of inspirational stuff in social media, I mean, you got to basically cut out alcohol. It just you can't do it and be a great surgeon. And also like meditation. In other words, you stop and think about things that are good, et cetera. And then the things that are going to stress you out, like if you're hyper controlling of everything, you're going to be stressed out all the time. And I don't want to live that life. Another thing I tell my patients when they ask about anesthesia is I want to go to sleep at night. And so there isn't an anesthesia person here that I wouldn't have put me to sleep and take care of me. And I mean that because I've had some rough experience with anesthesia providers I wouldn't want to repeat. And that'll make you or break you. And so you've got to be really careful. So,
Oh, that's a really good point. If anybody wanted to get a hold of you, I know your website is drpendiville.com. Is there
yes.
any other way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, that or my Instagram page is SWFL Face Doctor, which is, and they can message me through there. Or yeah, www.drprendiville.com, or call my office. I mean, we're very receptive to calls too at 239-437-3900. And I have great staff, and be happy to answer calls. And I want to say one more anecdote that I said as far as like how I got to becoming a facial plastic surgeon. My uncle Brendan was the first formally trained plastic surgeon in Ireland, and he actually
Oh,
trained in the post World War II era in England, and in Chepstow in Wales, and he actually had training with McIndoe and Gillies, who were two of the founders of plastic surgery. And he actually, in other words, after World War I, World War II, those were the guys that were reconstructing the major defects, et cetera. So he came back to Ireland, and he started the first burn center in Dublin, and he was really like inspiration to my father, who was also a physician, and also to me. And so when it came down to deciding what to do, my father said, "Well, why don't you consider doing what Brendan did?" And so that's just what happened. So
yeah, but he wasn't doing facelifts for the Dublin ladies. What?
no, he was doing cleft lips. Yeah, yeah. Back then, plastic surgery was different, and he was really a reconstructive guy. And actually, when I started my career, I really, as I said, I really enjoyed the reconstructive portion.
Mhm.
You have to be creative. You don't know what you're going to get. And it actually, if you're a very good reconstructive surgeon, you have all the tools necessary to become a great aesthetic surgeon. So,
Nice. All right. Well, there's a motivational message for everyone who's thinking of something. Yeah, congratulations. All right. So thank you so much, Dr. Prendiville. I'll be seeing you at the next meeting, I'm sure. And everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. If you would please subscribe and review the Beauty and Biz podcast. And then if you've got any feedback or questions for me, you can always leave them on my website at catherinemaley.com. You can also schedule a growth session with me to figure out where some of the issues might be in your practice that are holding you back. Or you can always DM me on Instagram at Catherine Maley MBA. Thanks so much, and we will talk again soon.
The fastest way to success is to model other successful surgeons who have what you want, but you can only see their results, not the path they took to get there. So you continue to jump from one thing to another, hoping to find something that will work for you too. But it rarely does. So try this shortcut instead. It's guaranteed to move you forward. I compiled my intellectual property to grow cosmetic revenues, everything I've gleaned over the years, into one playbook of the most successful practices and what they do to win. Go to cosmeticpracticevault.com and let's grow your cosmetic revenues.